Chapter 17, in which Abdullah at last reaches the castle in the air. There was a cushion and a basket among the remains of supper on the table. There was a rumpled dent in one of the beds and a cloud of tobacco smoke above it, as if the soldier had been lying there smoking until very recently. The window was closed. Abdullah rushed toward it, intending to fling it open and look out for no real reason except that it was all he could think of, and found himself tripping over a saucer full of cream. The saucer overturned, slewing thick yellow-white cream in a long streak across the magic carpet. Abdullah stood staring down at it. At least the carpet was still there. What did that mean? There was no sign of the soldier, and certainly no sign of a noisy baby anywhere in the room, nor, he realized, turning his eyes rapidly toward every place he could think of, was there any sign of the genie bottle.
"Oh, no!"
Sophie said, arriving at the door.
"Where is he? He can't have gone far if the carpet's still here."
Abdullah wished he could be so certain of that. "Without desiring to alarm you, mother of a most mobile baby," he said, "I have to observe that the genie appears to be missing also." A small vague frown creased the skin of Sophie's forehead.
"What genie?"
While Abdullah was remembering that, as midnight, Sophie had always seemed quite unaware that the genie existed, Letty arrived in the room, too, panting, with one hand pressed to her side.
"What's the matter?"
she gasped.
"They're not here,"
said Sophie.
"I suppose the soldier must have taken Morgan to the landlady. She must know about babies."
With a feeling of grasping at straws, Abdullah said, "I will go and see." It was always just possible that Sophie was right, he thought as he sped down the first flight of stairs. It was what most men would do faced with a screaming baby suddenly, always supposing that man did not have a genie bottle in his hand. The lower flight of stairs was full of people coming up, men wearing tramping boots and some kind of uniform. The landlord was leading them upward, saying, "On the second floor, gentlemen. Your description fits the Strangian if he had cut off his pigtail, and the younger fellow is obviously the accomplice you speak of." Abdullah turned and ran back upstairs on tiptoe, 2 stairs at a time.
"There is a general disaster, most bewitching pair of women,"
he gasped to Sophie and Letty.
"The landlord, a perfidious publican, is bringing constables to arrest myself and the soldier. Now what can we do?"
It was time for a strong-minded woman to take charge. Abdullah was quite glad that Sophie was one. She acted at once. She shut the door and shot its bolt.
"Lend me your handkerchief,"
she said to Letty, and when Letty passed it over, Sophie knelt and mopped the cream off of the magic carpet with it.
"You, come here,"
she told Abdullah.
"Get on the carpet with me and tell it to take us to wherever Morgan is. You stay here, Letty, and hold the constables up. I don't think the carpet would carry you." "Fine,"
said Letty.
"I want to get back to Ben before that king starts blaming him anyway. But I'll give that landlord a piece of my mind first. It'll be good practice for the king."
As strong-minded as her sister, she squared her shoulders and stuck out her elbows in a way that promised a bad time for the landlord and the constables as well. Abdullah was glad about Letty, too. He crouched on the carpet and snored gently. The carpet quivered. It was a reluctant quiver.
"Oh, fabulous fabric, carbuncle and chrysolite among carpets,"
Abdullah said.
"This miserable, clumsy churl apologizes profoundly for spilling cream upon your priceless surface."
Heavy knocking came at the door. "Open, in the king's name!" bellowed someone outside. There was no time to flatter the carpet any further.
"Carpet, I implore you,"
Abdullah whispered.
"Transport myself and this lady to the place where the soldier has taken the baby."
The carpet shook itself irritably, but it obeyed. It shot forward in its usual way, straight through the closed window. Abdullah was alert enough this time actually to see the glass in the dark frame of the window for an instant, like the surface of water, as they passed through it, and then soared above the silver globes that lit the street. But he doubted if Sophie was. She clutched Abdullah's arms with both hands, and he rather thought her eyes were shut.
"I hate heights,"
she said.
"It had better not be far."
"This excellent carpet will carry us with all possible speed, worshipful witch," Abdullah said, trying to reassure her and the carpet together. He was not sure it worked with either of them. Sophie continued to cling painfully to his arm, uttering little short gasps of panic, while the carpet, having made one brisk, giddy sweep just above the towers and lights of Kingsbury, swung dizzily around what seemed to be the domes of the palace, and began on another circuit of the city.
"What is it doing?"
gasped Sophie. Evidently her eyes were not quite shut. "Peace, most serene sorceress," Abdullah reassured her. "It does but circle to gain height as birds do." Privately, he was sure the carpet had lost the trail, but as the lights and domes of Kingsbury went by underneath for the third time, he saw he had accidentally guessed right. They were now several hundred feet higher. On the fourth circuit, which was wider than the third, though quite as giddy, Kingsbury was a little jeweled cluster of lights far, far below. Sophie's head bobbed as she took a downward peep. Her grip on Abdullah became even tighter, if that was possible.
"Oh, goodness and awfulness,"
she said.
"We're still going up? I do believe that wretched soldier has taken Morgan after the djinn."
They were now so high that Abdullah feared she was right.
"He had no doubt wished to rescue the princess,"
he said,
"in hope of a large reward." "He had no business to take my baby along, too,"
Sophie declared.
"Just wait till I see him. But how did he do it without the carpet?" "He must have ordered the genie to follow the djinn, O moon of motherhood,"
Abdullah explained. To that Sophie said again,
"What genie? I assure you, sharpest of sorceress minds, that I owned a genie as well as this carpet, though you never appeared to see it,"
Abdullah said.
"Then I take your word for it,"
said Sophie.
"Keep talking. Talk, or I shall look down, and if I look down, I know I'll fall off."
Since she was still clinging mightily to Abdullah's arm, he knew that if she fell, then so would he. Kingsbury was now a bright, hazy dot, appearing on this side and then on that, as the carpet continued to spiral upward. The rest of Ingery was laid out around it like a huge dark blue dish. The thought of plunging all that way down made Abdullah almost as frightened as Sophie. He began hastily to tell her all his adventures, how he had met Flower in the night, how the Sultan had put him in prison, how the genie had been fished out of the oasis pool by Kabul Akbar's men, who were really angels, and how hard it was to make a wish that the genie's malice did not spoil. By this time, he could see the desert as a pale sea south of Ingery, though they were so high that it was quite hard to make out anything below.
"I see now that the soldier agreed I had won that bet in order to convince me of his honesty,"
Abdullah said ruefully.
"I think he always meant to steal the genie and probably the carpet, too."
Sophie was interested. Her grip on his arm relaxed slightly, to Abdullah's great relief.
"You can't blame that genie for hating everyone,"
she said.
"Think how you felt shut in that dungeon."
"But the soldier," said Abdullah.
"Is another matter,"
Sophie declared.
"Just wait till I get my hands on him. I can't abide people who go soft over animals and then cheat every human they come across. But to get back to this genie you say you had, it looks as if the djinn meant you to have it. Do you think it was part of his scheme to have disappointed lovers help him get the better of his brother?"
"I believe so," said Abdullah.
"Then, when we get to the Cloud Castle, if that's where we're going,
Sophie said.
we might be able to count on other disappointed lovers arriving to help.
Maybe, Abdullah said cautiously.
But I recollect, most curious of cats, that you were fleeing to the bushes while the djinn spoke, and the djinn expected only myself.
Nevertheless, he looked upward. It was growing chilly now, and the stars seemed uncomfortably close. There was a sort of silveriness to the dark blue of the sky which suggested moonlight trying to break through from somewhere. It was very beautiful. Abdullah's heart swelled with the thought that he might be, at last, on the way to rescue Flower in the Night. Unfortunately, Sophie looked up too. Her grip on his arm tightened.
Talk,
She said.
I'm terrified. Then you must talk too, courageous caster of spells,
Said Abdullah.
Close your eyes and tell me of the Prince of Arkistan, to whom Flower in the Night was betrothed. I don't think she could have been,
Sophie said, almost babbling. She was truly terrified.
The king's son is only a baby. Of course, there's the king's brother, Prince Justin, but he was supposed to be marrying Princess Beatrice of Strengia, except that she refused to hear of it and ran away. Do you think the djinns got her? I think your sultan was just after some of the weapons our wizards had been making here, and he wouldn't have got them. They don't let the mercenaries take them south when they go. In fact, Hal says they shouldn't even send mercenaries. Hal...
Her voice faded. Her hands on Abdullah's arm shook.
Talk,
She croaked. It was getting hard to breathe.
I barely can. Strong-handed, Sultana.
Abdullah gasped.
I think the air is thin here. Can you not make some witchly weaving that might help us to breathe? Probably not. You keep calling me a witch, but I'm really quite new to it.
Sophie protested.
You saw? When I was a cat, all I could do was get larger.
But she let go of Abdullah for a moment in order to make short, jerky gestures overhead.
Really, Air?
She said.
This is disgraceful. You are going to have to let us breathe a bit better than this, or we won't last out. Gather around and let us breathe you.
She clutched Abdullah again.
Is that any better?
There really did seem to be more air now, though it was colder than ever. Abdullah was surprised, because Sophie's method of casting a spell struck him as most unwitch-like. In fact, it was not much different from his own way of persuading the carpet to move. But he had to admit that it worked.
Yes. Many thanks, speaker of spells. Talk!
Said Sophie. They were so high that the world below was out of sight. Abdullah had no trouble understanding Sophie's terror. The carpet was sailing through dark emptiness, up, and Abdullah knew that if he had been alone, he might have been screaming.
You talk, mighty mistress of magics, he quavered. Tell me of this wizard Howl of yours.
Sophie's teeth chattered, but she said proudly,
He's the best wizard in Ingri or anywhere else. If he'd only had time, he would have defeated that djinn. And he's sly and selfish and vain as a peacock and cowardly, and you can't pin him down to anything.
Indeed? Asked Abdullah.
Strange that you should speak so proudly, such a list of vices, most loving of ladies. What do you mean, vices?
Sophie asked angrily.
I was just describing Howl. He comes from another world entirely, you know, called Wales, and I refuse to believe that he's
She ended in a moan as the carpet plunged upward into what had seemed to be a gauzy veil of cloud. Inside the cloud, the gauziness proved to be flakes of ice, which peppered them in slivers and chunks and rounds like a hailstorm. They were both gasping as the carpet burst upward out of it. Then they both gasped again, in wonder. They were in a new country, which was bathed in moonlight. moonlight that had the golden tinge of a harvest moon to it. But when Abdullah spared an instant to look for the moon, he could not see it anywhere. The light seemed to come from the silver-blue sky itself, studded with great, limpid golden stars. But he could only spare that one glance. The carpet had come out beside a hazy, transparent sea, and was laboring alongside soft rollers breaking on cloudy rocks, regardless of the fact that they could see through each wave as if it was gold-green silk. Its water was wet and threatened to overwhelm the carpet. The air was warm, and the carpet, not to speak of their own clothes and hair, was loaded with piles of melting ice. Sophie and Abdullah, for the first few minutes, were entirely occupied in sweeping ice over the edges of the carpet into the translucent ocean, where it sank through into the sky beneath and vanished. When the carpet bobbed up lighter and they had a chance to look around, they gasped again. For here were the islands and promontories and bays of dim gold that Abdullah had seen in the sunset, spreading out from beside them into the far silver distance, where they lay hushed and still and enchanted, like a vista of paradise itself. The pellucid waves broke on the cloud shore, with only the faintest of whispers, which seemed to add to the silence. It seemed wrong to speak in such a place. Sophie nudged Abdullah and pointed. There, on the nearest cloudy headland, stood a castle. A massive, proud, soaring towers with dim silvery windows showing in them. It was made of cloud. As they looked, several of the taller towers streamed sideways and shredded out of existence, while others shrank and broadened. Under their eyes, it grew like a blot into a massive, frowning fortress, and then began to change again. But it was still there, and still a castle, and it seemed to be the place where the carpet was taking them. The carpet was going at a swift walking pace, but gently, keeping to the shoreline as if it were not at all anxious to be seen. There were cloudy bushes beyond the waves, tinged red and silver like the aftermath of sunset. The carpet lurked in the cover of these, just as it had lurked behind trees in Kingsbury Plain, while it circled the bay to come to the promontory. As it went, there were new vistas of golden seas, where far-off smoky shapes moved that could have been ships, or may have been cloudy creatures on business of their own. Still in utter whispering silence, the carpet crept out onto the headland, where there were no more bushes. Here, it slunk close to the cloudy ground, much as it had followed the shapes of the roofs in Kingsbury. Abdullah did not blame it. Ahead of them, the castle was changing again, stretching out until it had become a mighty pavilion. As the carpet entered the long avenue leading to its gates, domes were rising and bulging, and it had protruded a dim gold minaret as if it were watching them coming. The avenue was lined with cloudy shapes, which also seemed to watch them coming. The shapes grew out of the cloud ground in the way that one often sees a tuft of cloud curl upward out of the main mass. But unlike the castle, they did not change shape. Each one ramped proudly upward, somewhat in the shape of a seahorse or the knights in a game of chess, except that their faces were blanker and flatter than the faces of horses, and surrounded by curling tendrils that were neither cloud nor hair. Sophie looked at each one as they passed it with increasing disfavor.
I don't think much of his taste in statues,
she said.
Oh, hush, most outspoken lady,
Abdullah whispered.
These are no statues, but the 200 attendant angels spoken of by the jinn.
The sound of their voices attracted the attention of the nearest cloudy shape. It stirred mistily, opened a pair of immense moonstone eyes, and bent to survey the carpet as it slunk past.
"Don't you dare try to stop us,"
Sophie said to it.
"We're only coming to get my baby."
The huge eyes blinked. Evidently the angel was not used to being spoken to so sharply. Cloudy white wings began to spread from its sides. Hastily, Abdullah stood up on the carpet and bowed.
"Greetings, most noble messenger of the heavens," he said. "What the lady says so bluntly is the truth. Pray forgive her. She is from the north, but she, like me, comes in peace. The jinns are minding her child, and we do but come to collect him and render them our most humble and devout thanks."
This seemed to placate the angel. Its wings melted back into its cloudy sides, and though its strange head turned to watch them as the carpet slunk on, it did not try to stop them. But by now, the angel across the way had its eyes open too, and the two next were turned to stare as well. Abdullah did not dare sit down again. He braced his feet for balance and bowed to each pair of angels as they came to it. This was not easy to do. The carpet knew how dangerous the angels could be as well as Abdullah did, and it was moving faster and faster. Even Sophie realized that a little politeness would help. She nodded to each angel as they whipped past.
"Evening,"
she said.
"Lovely sunset today. Evening."
She had not time for more because the carpet was fairly scuttling up the last stretch of avenue. When it reached the castle gates, which were shut, it dived through like a rat up a drain pipe. Abdullah and Sophie were suffused with foggy damp, and then out into calm, goldish light. They found they were in a garden. Here the carpet fell to the floor, limp as a dish rag, where it stayed. It had little shivers running through the length of it, as a carpet might that was shaking with fear, or panting with effort, or both. Since the ground in the garden was solid, and did not seem to be made of cloud, Sophie and Abdullah cautiously stepped onto it. It was firm turf, growing silver-green grass. In the distance, among formal hedges, a marble fountain played. Sophie looked at this, and looked around, and began to frown. Abdullah stooped and considerately rolled the carpet up, patting it and speaking soothingly.
"Bravely done, most daring of Damasks,"
he told it.
There, never fear. I will not allow any jinn, however mighty, to harm so much as a thread of your treasured fabric or a fringe from your border." "You sound like that soldier making a fuss of Morgan when he was whippersnapper,"
Sophie said.
"The castle's over there."
They set off toward it, Sophie staring alertly around and uttering one or two snorts, Abdullah with the carpet tenderly over his shoulder. He patted it from time to time and felt the quivers die out of it as they went. They walked for some time, for the garden, although it was not made of cloud, changed and enlarged around them. The hedges became artistic banks of pale pink flowers, and the fountain, which they could see clearly in the distance all the time, now appeared to be crystal, or possibly chrysolite. A few steps more, and everything was in jeweled pots and frondy, with creepers trained up lacquered pillars. Sophie's snorts became louder. The fountain, as far as they could tell, was of silver, inset with sapphires.
"That jinn has taken liberties with a person's castle,"
Sophie said.
"Unless I'm entirely turned around. This used to be our bathroom."
Abdullah felt his face heat up. Sophie's bathroom or not, these were the gardens of his daydreams. Hasruel was mocking him, as he had mocked Abdullah all along. When the fountain ahead turned to gold, glinting wine dark with rubies, Abdullah became as annoyed as Sophie was.
"This is not the way a garden should be, even if we disregard the confusing changes,"
he said angrily.
"A garden should be natural-seeming, with wild sections, including a large area of bluebells." "Quite right,"
said Sophie.
"Look at that fountain now! What a way to treat a bathroom!"
The fountain was platinum with emeralds.
"Ridiculously flashy," said Abdullah. "When I design my garden—"
He was interrupted by a child screaming. Both of them began to run.